But we'll kick off. So thank you everyone for coming onto this webinar. We're going to talk a bit about FIM and MIM and what your options are going forward, and we'll touch on ADMT as well, just because it kind of fits in this space that we're working in. I'd like to introduce Michael Van Horenbeeck first, and I'll introduce myself after that.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Michael. I run a consulting company out of Belgium called The Collective, where we do a variety of services, security, identity, and migration as well. And as such, I work regularly with the fine folks of PowerSyncPro as well. And here, happy to be talking about the future or the past of FIM and MIM.
Nice, thanks, Michael. Yeah, my name is Twan Van Beers. It's actually funny, it's the first time I've had a webinar with two almost Dutch people, one Belgian, one Dutch. I've been, I'm one of the owners of PowerSyncPro. I actually wrote the original version back in 2018. I've been around this scene a long time, like I mentioned. I started developing back in the early 90s. Been doing migrations for a long time, and identity underpins all migrations. So my interest is in identity sync, migrating people between clouds, etc. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about FIM, MIM, understand where your concerns and worries are, and help you with planning out how you want to replace the products. Go to the next slide. So I'll let you talk about this, Michael.
Just for my reference, are we showing slides? Because I'm not seeing any, just making sure.
Oh, that means I'm not sharing my screen. Hold on. I thought I did. It's because I started the meeting. I automatically make sure I've got the right screen. This one. Yep. Apologies for that.
Yeah, no worries. I'm happy to talk without slides. And I think that's the notion as well for the people on the call. The slides is just there for illustrative purposes. But why are we talking about old products? I would say MIM, FIM, ILM, whatever name you want to give it. It's because on the horizon there is an end date, and ideally by that end date you've done something to replace that. As Twan mentioned during the introduction, it is much more than just a product, right? It's not just about MIM, FIM itself, or ADMT for that matter. It's more about, hey, it was a product for all intents and purposes, a really good one. It had its challenges, and as someone who's dealt with identity for a long time, I've worked with MIM, FIM for a lot of years, right? And I see it still being used here and there. And I also see that this is not the thing that is easily replaced, or perceived as being easily replaced. So rather than waiting until end of 2028 to have a webinar about, hey, you do know that this is going to go away in a short time, I figured, and I think Twan's idea was to kind of talk about this topic early on, because depending on how you use it, what you do with it, there could be a lot of work involved in morphing this into something else. For all intents and purposes, when I look at MIM and FIM and what they do today, I immediately think, well, there has to be a better way. And there is, right? The technology has moved on, architectures have moved on, standards have been developed that didn't exist in the day. And even though the extensibility of FIM and MIM allowed it to be very, very flexible and to connect to lots of different environments, I think it now is a good time to kind of proverbially turn the page and look at something more modern. Modern doesn't always need to be fully cloud-based, but the reality of things is that most solutions today tend to look towards a SaaS solution of some sort. So I think that's the why this is really important. And because of the cornerstone, and we've all heard the mantra of identity is the cornerstone of identity and everything else, of security and everything else. But because it's so intertwined with everything, it touches on much more than just a single element, right? It is about your core identity strategy, your identity lifecycle management, governance as a whole, but also migrations. Migrations are evolving, right? ADMT, AD to AD, today we have much more complexity because in most organizations there is still an Active Directory, but now we have those tenants, and we see more and more tenant-to-tenant migrations, synchronized tenant-to-tenant migrations. The complexity and the landscape kind of changes. And with that, if we move on to the next slide, it kind of really highlights that there is no one thing that you can do, right? Depending on what you do today, right? There are organizations that use MIM to synchronize to directories. Well, there is a quick and easy solution for that, if you will. But then there's organizations that have built entire workflows around it, have integrated apps and services, and God knows what. They've built their own custom solutions. And for those organizations, the replacement of FIM MIM could be a lot harder. And therefore, you have to kind of look at what am I doing today, where I'm going to go next. Is there any, off-the-shelf solution? How do I move from A to B? What does that mean? Do I have to rebuild? Do I have to, create a bespoke solution as well? Do I keep them running side by side? And because of all of that, there is this whole, plethora of things that could extend the lifetime of the project if you want to move from one to another. But again, it's very individual, right? I think, Twan, you can kind of agree that I haven't seen a single MIM installation that's the same. Like I've always seen like, oh, we do this differently.
Yes, that's the good and the bad about MIM in general, isn't it? Like it's so flexible, you can do anything, but that means that two installations, like you say, Michael, they're never the same. People have different connectors they've built, different ways of doing things, different requirements. So they're all bespoke.
Yeah, and especially in the latter, right? I see there's always this cycle where a new product or a new feature or something is launched, and then there's a whole upkeep or an uptick in people that get to know the technology, the product, whatever, and then at the high point of the product, there's lots of knowledge available. People know how to work with it, and then it falls down a slope, and we're now at the very end of that life cycle where finding people that know MIM, that know the customizations, that know how to work with it, become very sparse, and it's very hard to find as well. And as such, the cost of maintaining or migrating away is only going to go up. And I think that's something to consider as well, which is better start sooner rather than later. But yeah, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like in the year 2000, COBOL programmers were suddenly very well paid because everyone needed them to do things. So we're the same here now. We're in that phase where MIM and FIM are end of life. I know Microsoft keeps extending, but eventually it's going to go away, and the people that have the knowledge are also disappearing. We see that in Active Directory as well. There are fewer and fewer Active Directory people, and those that are hardcore Active Directory people, they're kind of my age. They're older, not quite retirement age yet, but it's the way of the world. Everyone wants to be on the cloud side. Just to let you know, I have actually allowed microphones for everyone, so anyone's more than welcome to come off mute and chat. We're friendly, we don't bite. So just so you know, and feel free to ask questions anytime as well.
Yeah. So with that, maybe let's walk through what do we see that FIM MIM ADMT are being used for, perhaps.
Yes, nice lead into the next slide. I've actually, out of this slide, I'm kind of curious to see which of these folks on the call, which ones you are using FIM MIM or ADMT for, in particular, which ones kind of keep you up at night, which ones are disconcerting. We know there are lots of capabilities, like we said, MIM, FIM, they've been around for directory synchronization for a long time. There are modern ways of doing things around life cycles, workflows, being able to sync passwords between two sides. And of course, ADMT itself has been around for migrations for a very long time now. It's obviously out of support, but we still encounter people that are saying, oh, well, I'm trying to do this in ADMT and I can't quite get it to work with my new Windows 11 estate. So we want to talk about that as a problem as well, of course. So very keen to hear if people do have specific issues that they're having with, or that they are worried about with MIM and FIM as they get to end of life. And if you have an ADMT replacement already, we're obviously going to talk about PowerSyncPro in further slides to come. So I'll just wait to see if anyone wants to chip in. I know it's always hard being the first to make a statement on a webinar. And see a few people I can call names out.
Yeah, they can even put it in chat, because I'd really love to
Yep.
understand, like, what core functionalities the people are using in. So
yeah, thanks, Neil. I know RC4 has got some press, some of it not all great. I'm about to release a blog that kind of dispels some of the fear mongering that's going on, where people are saying if Microsoft are changing RC4, disabling RC4, it's like not quite the way. So definitely, if you've got specific RC4 concerns, we can chat them through. The July change that's coming is Microsoft are changing the default encryption type. So if you are not setting your encryption types in group policy and you're relying on RC4, then July is going to be a painful update for you if you haven't prepared for that ahead of time. And if you're doing syncs, if you're doing password syncs at the moment, and you do want to turn off RC4, you will have to make sure that the password sync tool you're using supports that kind of scenario. Without RC4, you have to use password filters on every domain controller and intercept the clear text password for that to be changed. So this is where a tool like PowerSyncPro comes into its own. It will do that password sync within seconds across the estate, so pretty much real time, which will make things easier for your users, because they obviously know which password to use in which environment, which side. Thanks for that, Neil. Nothing from Johnny or Herb or Peter.
There's a special place in hell for RC4.
Yeah, it's been around so long, hasn't it? It's funny that we never had so much of an issue with when they talked about DES encryption and that going away. For those of you that do directory synchronization, things like reporting, is that something that's important to you? Something that you think, well, it just sits there, it does its thing in the background, you don't really notice it? We definitely have had one client in particular that has been using PowerSyncPro. I think this is now coming up to the 4th year, and what we support it on their behalf. But I maybe log on to the server once every 6 months just to check everything's okay. It just does its thing in the background. They have 14 different forests. They have now only down to 1 tenant. And there are like 250,000 users. It just does what it needs to do. So that's kind of the kind of tool that we like to use ourselves internally. One that just sits there. Like, I'm hoping that MIM and FIM folks have had the same kind of experience over the years. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be using it anymore.
Hey, Twan, it's Johnny here. How are you?
Hey, Johnny. How you doing, man?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, mate. Good. I managed to squeeze some free time in between PowerSyncPro migrations. I was just on that back one. Massive challenges, I think, was on the ADMT side over God knows how many years. So I kind of like from my perspective, like kind of glad it's going. And I know that sounds a little bit destructive in terms of what the capabilities were, but where like you said, where companies are now sort of gravitating to from a cloud perspective, or cloud only even perspective, it it's similar to Exchange Online. Like I don't ever want to think about spending an entire day trawling through Exchange database logs or truncated logs ever again. Like I just want it to be that chapter to be gone and closed, because it's not a good use of engineer time from my perspective, and in terms of what companies are trying to do now, where you're trying to go. And for me, the likes of PowerSyncPro obviously coming in, it's a complete game changer for that, from domain restructuring, diversity, sorry, I can never say it, M&A perspective, just like it's night and day. Like the difference in terms of the capabilities of what you can now do, or what, like I said, what companies are trying to go, where companies are trying to go to, is just like, I can't believe like it sort of I can't taken this long. I know it's been 8 years in the making, but for things to sort of move, I know things move, slowly, but the speed now at which technology moves, it's like this. I can't wait to like I said, can't wait for these tools to go, because they had a purpose. I think in time, I don't know if everyone agrees on that, but certainly at a time they absolutely ticked a box. For me now, and for us and our team and what we're doing and the kind of projects we're getting customers, there's no appetite. There's zero appetite for spending months and months and months and months on FIM and MIM stuff. There's absolutely none at all. It's in mergers, acquisitions, out, 2 month project, see, and done. That's the speed in which things need to move, and which things can move now. But that's obviously only because you've now got the tooling and the capability of this near instantaneous sync. The users, groups, devices, whatever it might be. It's just obviously that technology is now allowing to do that. So yeah, from my perspective, that was one thing, ADMT for sure.
Okay, thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, so I think you hit kind of the nail on the head there. The ADMT, FIM, MIM were conceived in a time where the architectures were very vastly different. Like there was a time where having multiple forests, and I'm still talking about on-premises Active Directory forests, was a thing. Where even there was a certain time or recommendation about a bastion forest said, have a resource forest and a user account forest, and where everyone basically that was serious about security had two forests, and with two forests comes the requirement to be able to share identities, and so I think these products, they were conceived for one reason, and then hey, now we have the challenge of having multiple places with identities, so we kind of have to govern them because we didn't want to do it twice. So it's creating its own market, and then I think MIM is a really great example of how a product adapted, not necessarily in the best way possible, to the changing demands. Like it was conceived for one thing, and then we need extensibility, so let's create all these connectors to connect God knows where, and then all of a sudden you have this spider that has its legs in 8 different places doing all sorts of stuff, and it did it well. Like it is what it is. I think ADMT, it's kind of the same thing, like with multiple forests and divestitures and acquisitions and all of that. There was the need for, hey, how do we move from A to B without doing everything manually? Well, let's write a quick tool. I think that was the forefront or the forerunner for anything that's AI developed these days. Like vibe coding, that's what these tools were, but they were developed by a company. Just kind of how it feels.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny how you mentioned forefront, because that's another one that's.
Well, that's why I was hesitating for a second. I was like, I'm going to confuse people. They did share a name for a second. Anyway, the thing is that companies today are in a hybrid scenario. They're moving away from those legacy environments, and I pity the ones that still have 14 forests and more, because that's not a really great place to be in. Luckily, and again, shameless plug for you, Twan. Luckily, there are still vendors that get it and still have a solution. Because if you rely on Microsoft and others to fix that architecture for you, you are in a really, really bad place. So you kind of want to move away from that. You want to simplify things. Which kind of brings me to the Entra, Microsoft native, cloud native stuff. Because with the evolution of connectors, LDAP, predominantly being LDAP back in the day, and some databases here and there, we still see that, but we also see that there are more modern systems, more and more SaaS applications finally support provisioning through SCIM, which kind of solves half of the governance issues that we had. Like, user synchronization, password synchronization stuff. Well, if you've got an SSO system, a true SSO system, where everything points to one, and you kind of distribute identities into the other systems from there, it kind of changes how you do things and what you need to do that, and you can do native native things. This is where, in my opinion, the Microsoft solutions today excel. Anything that you like, if you have a centralized tenant, let's say, even if you have multiple tenants, but let's say you've got a tenant and you've got all sorts of applications connected to that tenant. The Entra native capabilities, where you're syncing from a single or multiple on-premises ADs into that Entra tenant, using Cloud or Connect Sync, it doesn't really matter at that point. And then you're provisioning into other applications, other tenants from there. Even if you've got a multi-tenant organization with MTO, right, the multi-tenant organization capabilities and cross-tenant synchronization, you're kind of building on top of the built-in native capabilities that have their downsides, but so did FIM, MIM, ADMT, and all of that.
Do you find it interesting, Michael, that with AD, Microsoft kind of went, oh no, you need to consolidate and have a single forest, and that's just an easier way to go. Yes, they started with the ESA, the Bastion forest, but they moved away from that. But now, on the tenant side, they're saying, look, have MTO and use MTO to pull all of your acquired companies into one cloud of tenants. When that didn't work in AD, I don't see that their solutioning or the tooling is really geared to making that work in cloud either. So are we going to have a cloud consolidation solution in the future? Just wonder what people are thinking about that.
I think they, out of necessity, sure, right. We see the new tenant governance capabilities coming up, right, where Microsoft is actually developing or extending existing solutions to come up with a way to natively deal with having multiple tenants, because again, this is, I believe this is basic human psychology, or economics, if you will. You have one tenant and you purchase another company, the likelihood of them also having a tenant is very high these days. There was a time where you could get away with it, but reality is you have two. And then there is the reality of economics. Do I integrate them? Ideally, the answer is sure, let's do a cross-tenant migration, bring them all in, be one happy family. But the answer is, well, there's time, money, resources that you have to spend to do that. And then maybe there is no time, there is no budget, you don't have the expertise to do that. And so the discussion quickly becomes, well, what if we keep both of them? Or we have two departments, each in their own tenant, and I might split off one in the future, so I don't want to bring him in because I'm not sure what's happening. So the reason for having multiple environments, whether it's on-prem or the cloud, is sometimes valid. And I'm happy to see that they're bringing in tools. Now, Microsoft cannot solve all the problems. They will never, ever be able to solve that. They will never do that. They will, to the best of their ability, bring in as much as possible, but we'll always have to rely on other solutions, third parties, to solve parts of it. But I don't think that everything in one tenant is still the only answer. I think it's still the best answer from a user experience perspective. And in some cases, it absolutely makes sense to do those migrations, and please do. I really think that sometimes you have to go, no, honestly, you have to go through it. But there are cases where it just makes sense to have MTO, multiple tenants, set up an MTO, set up a tenant governance relationship, if you will, and just use that as your model, but also have to live with the drawbacks.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how separate those business units are, right? If they do a lot of collaboration together, that can get a little bit painful. But yeah, if they're largely separated anyway, then keeping them separate, they don't need the same email domain, they're kind of happy having their own UPNs to log on with, then yeah, you can definitely make it work. And it's interesting how many, like you say, first-party solutions there are now to kind of replace bits that FIM and MIM did. So like we talked about, obviously the sync, the hybrid sync, still from on-prem to cloud. You've got now the cross-tenant sync between clouds. So there are more and more first-party pieces being put together. I don't know if anyone here has worked with the lifecycle workflows for joiner movers, leavers, but those are powerful. They're really good. They give you a good basis to start from. You've got the HR provisioning coming in as well. If you use an HR system that is supported, you've kind of got a way to start to replicate what FIM and MIM was doing for you.
And to be honest, I like the approach that Microsoft's taking on the identity governance side of the join remove leader parts, right? The identity lifecycle workflows, they are in a way much more limited than what you could have built with FIM MIM, or what you can build with FIM MIM, if you will. But I think that's a good thing. Like, I've seen these behemoths being created, God knows workflows that are god awful. And by limiting people to certain workflows, certain capabilities, and certain extensions, you're kind of locking them into, please don't create this thing that no one wants to support afterwards. So even though I do see that evolve over time, I really like the simplicity of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes easy to forget that while you can, especially now with AI, you can vibe code lots of things. It isn't always the best thing for the organization as a whole in the longer run. So if you can manage to stick with first party, you're sometimes better off to stay in that road.
Yep, agree. And then, it took a lot of years for Microsoft to change some of the tenets, the source of authority stuff. I think that's a real game changer, where the relation on-prem cloud may actually change, become cloud on-prem, predominantly cloud on-prem for whatever is still there, because we're not going to get rid of AD anytime soon. That's for sure. I think those are the key features that we needed all along, but are only getting slowly these days.
Yeah. Do you get many customers that kind of ask you about AI elimination? Sorry, AD elimination. Got AI on the brain.
So
we've had some of those.
I think the conversation is, can you? And if the answer is yes, you should. But
yes,
the question is, can you? Right? There are, for better and worse, dependencies. If it's from a recoverability perspective, operational perspective, and whatever the reason is, there are good, valid reasons for AD. And let's be honest. It's been around for 26 years. It is robust. It just works. End of story. It does what it needs to do. And so, where a couple of years back there was this massive push, you have to get rid of AD. You have to. I'm getting more of the you can if you need to, which I think is a much more healthy approach. Now, maybe we'll evolve to a time in 20 years from now where no AD is left, or we call it Entra Lightweight on-prem, whatever marketing rebranding we'll have by then. But I see less of a push and more of a let's do the right thing and be smart about this.
Yeah, I think even Microsoft actually haven't got rid of AD themselves, right? They have AD pervasive throughout the organization, but they are starting to think about, when I talk to someone about this, like the easier part, and easiest relative because it's not that easy, is applications. Human users should be authenticating not via Kerberos or NTLM. They should be using OIDC, OAuth, Federation, some other IDP than Active Directory. But it's just that's the biggest risk factor or attack vector really in Active Directory. But it starts to drive you down that road of moving away from a dependency on AD. But for actual application, server to server or service to service communication, it's like Michael said, it's done a good job for 26 years. It's perfectly okay. Of course, if you're running in Azure, you've got managed identities. You can do everything in Entra ID, but not everyone is.
I think that it'll phase itself out with applications phasing themselves out, but we see AD being used in environments where machinery lives for up to 30 years. It just means that you have a 30-year dependency. It's the reality of things.
Yes,
and that's fine.
Exactly right. Yeah, and I mean, when manufacturing is case in point there, sometimes the hardware is, you're talking about millions of dollars worth of machines, and they are designed a particular way. But you've also got the likes of hospitals. How much would you trust a hospital that requires a SaaS solution to operate on you? You might to some extent, but you need to be quite certain that everything's going to work.
So I think we're digressing a little bit on the topic.
Yeah,
but
we are.
But
Sorry.
I don't think that cloud or on-prem matters, right? Because a cloud solution could be a lot better than whatever you have on premises. So, if they're operating on an AI solution, which has proven to be much more robust than that on-premises server they were using for 20 years, give me the SaaS solution to operate on me.
Yes.
But if, they have an unreliable connection, or, it hasn't been proven, or it has been vibe coded in the past 2 hours, then probably I'm going to go and stick with what I know for the past 20 years.
Yeah. Speaking of old, ADMT, just to move on to back on track. Obviously, ADMT was a useful tool, like Johnny said as well. It did what it did. It moved people between domains, forests, and did an okay job. It wasn't the most graceful looking tool, but did what it needed to do. However, obviously, it's not supported anymore. You can use it at your own risk, but like I said, we find people more and more now that are having issues with the tooling with modern OS and modern security baselines. Microsoft's answer in this space is really autopilot. Now, from our experience, autopilot's great. It works really well for new machines, someone having to reprovision because there was an issue, making sure that the build is the same, etc. But on a migration side, we tend to find there's different requirements. People do worry about how long the user is not able to work, whether their actual Windows profile, whether they can keep using that Windows profile because they've got, like myself, I don't know how many VPN clients I've got, but it's more than one handful. All of those VPN profiles, all of my browser profiles, all the different applications. So if I had to autopilot my own machine, I would probably be hampered in some way for half a day to a day. Autopilot also doesn't really work so well at scale. So, like we do migrations on a weekend, and we do thousands of devices in parallel. It wouldn't be as comfortable doing that with autopilot. It can be a little bit fragile. Of course, if it reboots partway through for some reason, or the user loses connectivity, the machine can get to a bricked state where it's kind of hard to support, and that then raises the support tickets as part of a migration. You can get inundated on that migration cutover. So we always think autopilot's perfect for giving you a very clean and known machine, but in a migration scenario, it doesn't always fit the bill. So that was one of the reasons why we built PowerSyncPro. And I mentioned that we do thousands of machines, but we don't always do them in a big bang. So there are times where a big bang is largely unavoidable. So if you're doing tenant moves, domain moves between tenants, so contoso.com has to move to the new tenant as being integrated. You're not rebranding people. The domain can only live on one tenant at a time. So obviously then you kind of have to think, okay, well, do I have some kind of middle house or a rewrite or anything like that, or do I just go big bang? Cloud Kerberos Trust, obviously Microsoft added that to allow cloud users to be able to use on-prem resources, but it's a single AD can only have one tenant that it trusts. So you can't have multiple tenants. So you can't have a halfway house between there either. And obviously you normally want the device to move as well. So it's not just about the user now. You want to change the device. It's not with compliance. You can do things to work cross-tenant, but you can't only move the user and not the device and expect compliance to still work. That's not how that is built. So there are times where you do need to do a big bang, but a big bang doesn't have to be unruly or chaotic. You do make sure that you plan things by, whether you do it by business or geography, or you have VP type users that you want to handle differently to the other people. you wouldn't do a big bang if you've got no ability to see into how things are going. So, migrating 10,000 devices on a weekend, if you've got no way of actually seeing which devices are successful and which ones are not, that's probably not a very good place to be when you start that big bang, because you have no way of tracking it. If you have to go around and manually support everything that fails, again, it's not a great place to be if you are doing this at scale. You obviously want to discover your users, get your batches set up, but you can, again, maintain those waves and see progress for those users.
Yeah, and what I was going to add to this is that I would take a purpose-built solution over tweaking a solution that is not intended to be used for a certain use case anytime. And the thing you mentioned about autopilot can do certain things, but PowerSyncPro does other things. I think that's the great solution. Autopilot was never conceived to do migrations. It is a solution to roll out devices and everything else, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's great that you can leverage it, but I think the power what you just mentioned is exactly that. When you can do coexistence, do coexistence, and you need to do cutovers, and there are scenarios, then having that support and being able to do it anyway, right? But in a smart way, not relying on a solution that was not conceived but could do it theoretically is just what you're looking after, that assurance and that support. Because during a migration weekend, and we've lived through some, but the last thing you want to worry about is the things that should be able, should be easy to do. Which is just my 2 cents. So
yeah, totally agree, Michael. And yeah, this is exactly why we built PowerSyncPro. So we saw people doing well, at that time, it was more data migrations, people using the data migration tools. But we're like, well, there's nothing really that's doing the identity part to make sure that works properly first. And there's nothing really that does the workstation part, because people just go, oh, well, the user will just have to reconfigure. And in the early days when I was doing tenant migrations, we'd send PDF documents, either printed or put them on the desktop and hope that users read them. And most of the time they don't. So you get this deluge of tickets on day one, and users get frustrated because they can't get back to work. And we even had people that would intentionally take the Monday and Tuesday off after migration weekend because they knew it was going to be a write-off anyway. And that's kind of the problem that we were trying to solve with PowerSyncPro. So you got the ability to synchronize, whether that's from Google, Entra, or AD. You can synchronize to AD or Entra. So you can use it for tenant migrations and AD consolidations. Make sure you get those user properties and group properties all set up correctly. You can obviously control who you're going to migrate at what times, but the big plus has been the workstation migration agent. So I think, as Johnny and as Michael both have said before, that's really a game changer, where the workstation just reconfigures itself based on your instructions and sends that information back to a central console, so you can see what's going on with every workstation that's going through that mix. The agent's built to be resilient, so if someone loses power, if someone closes the lid on it, loses internet access, has Windows updates that we're waiting and they interrupt as it's doing a reboot, the migration agent just carries on. Once it comes back online, that problem's resolved, it will just carry on and finish. So we're seeing really good success rates with our tooling. You can extend it, so you can have pre and post scripting that you inject. So if there are particular things you want to do, say, for example, you're running a config manager, SCCM, you can use a pre-migration script to remove that at that time. Or you have some kind of an EDR tool that you need to remove and replace it with a new one. You kind of can inject that into the migration process. So at the end, you have a machine that behaves like you want it to on the target tenant or in the target Active Directory. I mentioned about support tickets. Like we've had a couple now where literally it's 9,000-10,000 machines being migrated on a weekend, and then we're waiting for the support tickets on the Monday, but actually we don't see that many desktop related support tickets. So you sometimes see them for people have changed domains, they don't know what their log on was because they never actually read their instructions. But actually the desktop itself is migrated with only a handful of tickets, even when you do have thousands of machines going at the same time. And before PowerSyncPro, like we migrated J. Walter Thompson as Nero Blanco as my other company, and we migrated 15,000 people on that weekend. And on the Monday, there was no migration tool that helped with the workstation, so users were left to fend for themselves, and yeah, it was painful. So that was the reason then why I wrote PowerSyncPro and the migration agent to stop that, to just make it easier for everyone. I think even you've gone through migration recently, haven't you, Michael?
Quite a
decent size.
I mean, as you were talking about these larger migrations, I was like, I cannot imagine how anyone, and I'm being totally honest here, right? Totally independent here, but I couldn't imagine why would anyone would try and do that without PowerSyncPro. Like there are solutions that migrate parts like output profile or this or that, but that's not the essence of what we're dealing with, right? In a migration, tenant to tenant, on-prem to on-prem, whatever, on-prem to cloud, the device that you're working with is, in order to be fully manageable, secure, the user experience, that is the hardest part, in my opinion. Like doing a tenant-to-tenant migration for Exchange, the Exchange data, we've done it for 25 years now. We've got that locked down to an art. That's not hard. Moving files from SharePoint to SharePoint, it's not hard either. I mean, sure, there are some finer details, but the devices, they can be all over the world. They can be, in multiple locations. And as you mentioned, sometimes you just have to do a cutover, and it is the smartest way. And the ability to not touch physically, but to touch all user devices and reliably move them from A to B with a user experience that doesn't, blow them out of the water on the Monday morning is worth gold. I mean, that is one thing that you do not need on top of all the other things that you've got going on. And so, yes, we recently did a project together, and I can safely say that this is, I mean, the star of the show in terms of how that solves the problem. Now, it doesn't absolve organizations from doing the right thing and testing everything. And I mean, there's still some preparation that goes into making sure you go from A to B. But the fact that there is something that reliably does that in a way that is, are you in Singapore or in the United States? Don't care. Are you in time zone A or B? Don't care. It'll check in. It'll do. People often underestimate this. I still get into scoping calls for migrations, and the first questions I get is, how are we going to move the data? We've got 300 gigs of data. We've got 5,000 users, and this is going to be a problem. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Yes. None of that is a problem. None of that is
it's
easy.
Bread and butter now. Yeah,
it is. It's fairly easy. Obviously, there's finer details. I'm like, have you thought about the devices? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, and then the reality sinks in. So yeah. You could have me talk for hours about how useful this is, because I think it's totally underestimated.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get more and more complicated as Microsoft adds more and more capabilities. We've obviously seen device compliance as part of conditional access. We need to be able to cater for those things. macOS is gaining kind of first-class citizen status slowly but surely, probably slower than a lot of people would want. But that's obviously going to be another target for us is, okay, well, how do we do this for Mac? And invariably, Linux is going to come along. You can enter join a Linux machine now. So, okay, how do we do that for that? So we're always thinking about that. Mobiles is another one. There isn't really anything that does proper mobile migration. Just left to users again. So we are looking at that area as well as how can we make the journey easier. Again, this is taking us away from FIM and MIM, of course, but it's a wider discussion on the migration.
I see that James said, write a mobile device reconfiguration tool platform.
Yes,
I will
this
second that.
it's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are some limitations in what the mobile OS allows you to do, but kind of always thought even a bouncing ball type app may help the user. That tells them, okay, what do you do next?
Yeah, like I still see for the mobile user experience, like these huge PDFs being sent out the week before of go do this screenshots, and then the problem you have is there are the text-heavy users, and they'll read it and they'll go clickety click and off they go, and then there are the ones that says, well, the button is green on the screenshot, but I see a red button. I'm not touching anything anymore. Even though you've got a different version of Android or whatever it is. So absolutely agree.
We have actually seen some companies that have literally resorted. They have MDM managed devices. They literally factory reset every single mobile device on migration day. Like, wow, that's brave. I don't think I'd be happy with that.
I think it really depends on the use case. Like I can see some companies that we work with where that would have very little impact aside from the re-enrollment. Like because there's no personal data, there's maybe one app or anything, or they're used as a kiosk style thing. So I can see where that could be okay. But if you're talking about the personal, well, corporate owned, personally not even enrolled, but personally used, like a day-to-day phone, that's just no. That's a big no-no.
No, exactly.
No.
Now there are some areas that PowerSyncPro is not the right answer. So we talked about the first-party tools that Microsoft has available, but there are some third-party places where PowerSyncPro isn't the right fit. So I've put 4 on the screen for you to think about. Obviously, some people have SailPoint and others that it's a much bigger identity governance platform. So they sometimes use SailPoint in particular. I've come across as their syncing type tool. It doesn't really sync it. It just provisions the user in multiple places, and they have a password tool so that they can set the password consistently everywhere as well. So yeah, I didn't want to let you think PowerSyncPro is the answer for everything. There are places where PowerSyncPro could be supplemented by other tooling.
Yeah, and I think what I mentioned earlier, right? Purpose built. The solutions and the areas that you touch upon here are specialized. Even within those specializations, there's not a single tool to rule them all. Like from a PAM perspective, there's other solutions like there's CyberArk predominantly used, but there's Keeper. There's other solutions in the market. Even though Microsoft has some capabilities, and I think overall the one to rule them all, but in a limited manner, is probably the Microsoft ecosystem. But then once you dive deeper into the corner cases, that's where you get these, enterprise-style IGA solutions, enterprise-style PAM solutions, separate from what's already there, just because of limitations that exist. And I think the fifth area, like migrations and some directory synchronization scenarios, is just the area where PowerSyncPro actually fits in really well. So.
Yeah. We always like to think about, we're obviously all in the Microsoft ecosystem. We've got a tenant, we've got licenses. The old days where you'd go to the Gartner Magic Quadrant and find the product that you need and find the appropriate quadrant and pick the top right product to fill that gap. Those days are kind of not really there anymore. So we always advise people, once you've picked a platform, you're better off leveraging that as much as you possibly can, and only going to third party when you need a particular requirement, because the integration between all these tools is where things start falling apart. That's where you can have security vulnerabilities, you can have gaps in between, and those are very hard to plug. Yeah, we're always proponents of once you've got the platform, just sweat it as much as you can.
Yeah, and just from an ROI perspective, that just makes so much sense to do that. Like, use it to the max until you hit a point where it just can't do what you need to do, and then venture out into, custom solutions, third parties, and stuff. I wholeheartedly agree, but that's just common business sense, I would say. What I do find annoying maybe, but I see happen a lot, and I think that's maybe also a human trait, is that there are companies that are, I call them tool sick. Like, oh, there's a tool for this, let's buy that tool. Oh, there's a tool for this, let's buy that tool. I mean, sometimes you have to buy a tool for a good reason, but it's not always the go-to answer for every problem. I think, what do we have, what can we use, and then leverage it that way.
Yeah, and it's almost more so the tool has only been out relatively recently, like global secure access. If I was now in a place where we needed to do that kind of thing, but the features aren't quite there, would I opt to go down to Zscaler or another type of tool instead, or would I stick with GSA, live with the slight difference, and know that's going to get fixed at some point down the road?
Yeah, that point, right? I mean, when it's first released, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. GSA today, I'm actively telling people, this is beyond good enough. This is solid. Like, does it do exactly everything that Zscaler does in the same way? No. Do you need it though?
Yes.
And I think that's the crucial question. Like, does it do what you need, and is it integrated? Because and I think that's what Microsoft nails down really well. Like, they kind of stitch together some of their features and products and everything else that just creates that story. The whole identity-based elements, how that kind of stitches in together. There's no one else that does it as well as they do. Even though that from a point solution perspective, they may not be the best. It's just the entirety. So yeah, being the same point here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, next steps. If you are doing a migration or want to hear about the PowerSyncPro migration tool, come and talk to us. If you want to look at your wider identity modernization, if you have FIM and MIM and you want to look at how do you mitigate that risk of them going away, then talk to the collective or Michael, and we're here to help. So any questions that you've got, we're more than happy to answer. But thank you for the time in the meantime.
Thanks for joining today. Appreciate it.